Who asked you? Not just answering questions because no one asked me these things. This has to do with a bunch of buzz. I keep seeing people bubbling up to the surface in comment sections on various websites where they keep trying to bring up Obama every time they're trying to deflect from current reality. And it's not deflecting against Trump, or it's like Putin did something. Well, let's talk about Obama. Okay, that's really reaching. But anyway, here we go. Claim: Obama, the dictator, tyrant, power grabber, overreacher of presidential powers. All of the unconstitutional attempts he made to bypass legislative branch of government concerning firearms. In his first term, no call for any major new restrictions on guns or gun ownership happened in any way other than rhetoric and saber rattling like he did when he was running for office. The little bit of effort it took to put pen to paper wasn't done in most cases. Now, this is something that liberals don't want to bring up if they're in favor of gun control, because it shows that he took no real action to do what they want. And conservatives either don't bring it up or fucking just lie about it, because it shows that he did not do the extra step to make himself look bad. Obama is a little weird that way because he makes everybody uncomfortable no matter what they want on gun control for the first term. Remember, he wasn't aware that he would be elected the second term. So it's not some long-term game plan. He was spending the first term trying to avoid the subject. What he wanted and talked about is criticizing the gun lobby because they deserve it. He wanted a ban on assault weapons, even though that's a non-definition term. Those are just rifles. Assault rifles actually has become a definition, even though, just like assault weapon, assault rifle originally started off being a marketing term that meant nothing. It was marketing fluff. But assault weapon is literally dead-ass just marketing bullshit speak that was started by the gun industry and the gun lobby. A machoism term. It has nothing to do with any kind of law, or it shouldn't have. Why is it in the law? He wanted to ban sales of guns to buyers that were on the terrorist watch list. Let me put that again. He wanted anybody who is on the suspected terrorist list not to be able to buy a gun, and somebody decided, this is the hill I want to die on, arguing for gun rights for potential terrorists. But that's something he wanted. He wanted high-capacity magazines outlawed, or he wanted them limited in how big they are to be high-capacity, low-capacity. And later on, when he was asked, doesn't that mean you have to define this instead of making it a scare word? He dropped the subject. He wanted an expansion of background checks before you could buy a gun if you're in an area that requires background checks. Or you're buying a gun or acquiring a gun in a way that does. Private sales don't require background checks. He wanted background checks expanded. What about executive orders? You probably looked this video up for that because I'm going to probably put it in the title. Executive actions he directly was responsible for, authored, or whatever. Of all of them, a total of 23 were about guns. But these were called executive actions, not executive orders. Executive orders are ones that are turned into policy by the U.S. government on the federal level and have a direct effect. The executive actions he did were inarguably formed as calls to action for Congress and his administration to do something about guns. That's the 23 that gets cited. None of them were laws, regulations, executive orders. All of them were non-binding, carried no weight, and were summarily ignored. They are strongly worded suggestions or demands, acting as the first step of the president attempting to induce laws or rules to be put in. You might want to look up what the limitations on the president really are. In his first term, he did not do executive orders. There were rule suggestions, rule changes, and some things that were adopted, but even though he might have initiated things, he wasn't the one who made the final decision. Meanwhile, in his first term, when you look up onerous gun rules, regulation, and gun registrations, and it was done through not being a tyrant, but letting the legislative branch do their job. That meant that Republicans and Democrats got to argue it on the floor. He had very little to do with it. The only thing you could say is he didn't refuse to sign things. He didn't veto anything. Under Obama's 2 terms in office, he had something to do with a blistering number of things concerning firearms. Total. This is both terms. Again, the first term he avoided this mostly. Not entirely, but mostly. A rule change. 2 laws were passed. And 1 executive order concerning guns. That's 4 things. These are things that made it through, that he had direct effect on or is directly responsible for, not just he signed it instead of trying to veto it. Most of the things people bring up, he didn't initiate or is not legally allowed to, and didn't attempt to. He's a tyrant, blah, blah, blah. He's trying to take our guns. What did he do that worked, and what did he try to do? The try to do, if you want to say, is the 23 suggestions, but he formed them on purpose in such a way they were non-binding and did not have to be acted on. They could be ignored, which they were mostly. So what are these 4 things that actually go through? There's more than 4, but the 4 major ones that have anything to do with guns that you can really apply to him. Okay? Undid 2 rule changes that were done originally under Republicans concerning gun control. Under Reagan, if you went to a national park with a firearm, you had to lock it in the glove box or trunk most of the time. He rolled that back and allowed gun owners to carry weapons in national parks. He removed a restriction on gun rights that was put in place by a Republican named Ronald Reagan. He also changed a rule on transport and freedom to move around with a gun. On Amtrak, passengers were now allowed to carry guns in checked baggage. This was banned right after September 11th, and that might have also been a Republican that made a rule that restricted your gun rights, but Obama, the evil dictator trying to seize your guns, so far has allowed you to take them in checked baggage on Amtrak trains specifically, and allow you to go into national parks with it on your person rather than having to leave them in the car, in the trunk, or glove box locked up. There's only 4 of them here that you can really truly apply to Obama here without lying, without the propaganda, without bullshit from Fox News, aka FAUX News. Half of the shit that you could bring up increased gun rights that were restricted originally by Republicans. Let's go on. An executive order calling for mandatory criminal background checks on gun buyers. Now, the phrasing for that is supposed to be an executive order he did, but nobody cites the executive order's number. That's how you find them. Now, this is cited by anti-gunners that love Obama, but they won't cite it either, because if I look it up, I'll find out it really doesn't do this, right? And people who are against Obama and hate him and are saying that he's taking our guns, this is the only executive order, by the way, they won't cite it either, because if I read it, it really doesn't do that either. The reason is this executive order probably had no effect on things, or merely required enforcement of a rule that was suspended for a while, but had been put in place by a Republican under an executive order. So all he did was, or not, you decide. Anyway, this happened, but that could be reversed in the courts and Congress, and again, all of this can be reversed if Congress just wanted to change it, or if the court said that it wasn't legally allowed, or for some technicality. While he was in office, the rest of the government did the following that you could try to attribute to him. Or maybe he just didn't get in the way. Gunsmiths had to pay a new fee, quote unquote, every year of $2,250. if they met the definition of a firearms manufacturer of items on a list called the United States Munitions List, equating them with people making Stinger missiles. Actually, it was a decision by the ATF and wasn't stopped. But it happened under his administration. So there's some tyranny. It was because the ATF and other agencies were refusing to enforce it, because charging people $2,200 a year if they made something that's technically on the list but shouldn't be there, they weren't comfortable with it, but revenue enhancement happened. Do I have to bring up which party is primarily responsible for this happening and what type of political leaning people have in the department that did this? But let's blame Obama. Okay, there was a new rule and regulatory change in the National Firearms Act. It now required the FBI to do a background check on everybody involved in a gun trust, not just the primary owner or keeper of the gun trust or executor or whatever. Because gun trusts were being set up so people could come in who couldn't pass a background check and go shooting on the weekends at a gun range, which I have no problem with. It's a controlled item. If a machine gun's bolted to a trunnion and aiming downrange at a target, and you're shooting the shit out of a couple of old Buicks and shit, I guess it's okay. I honestly don't care, but all right, they weren't supposed to be allowed to do that, so okay. The next thing is it removed the requirement that you get a signature from your local police department to be able to pass some background checks in some cases for certain things. Oh, wait a minute, that expanded your gun rights because it meant the local sheriff or constable couldn't argue, which they were doing illegally. And instead of just arguing with them, they just removed the requirement entirely for that specific thing. Oh, that's not an example of Obama taking your gun rights, that's them removing it. But yeah, if you were part of a gun trust, or like my favorite example, a shooting range that has machine guns and they own it, and that's the gun trust, so that everybody else doesn't have to do the $200 tax stamp. It's just cheaper. And they're only going to shoot them on the, once a year, mostly. Okay. But yeah, the $2,200 fee is the next one. That you should complain about because, making grenades. So anyway, the next one. A new rule requiring Social Security Administration to report anybody with mental health conditions to the FBI firearms background check system. But that's Obama, right? No, that's actually part of how the law worked originally. That was suspended for a while because it was considered onerous because it disproportionately affected people who had post-traumatic stress syndrome after certain wars. So they just told them not to do it. But they were required at one time to do this a couple of times. Not just Obama. And again, that may or may not be attributable directly to Obama. When I looked this up, people who claim he did it directly won't provide proof. So that's something to look up. Everything else people claim he tried to do, or he did try to do, failed to pass because the president failed to sign off on any bill or law that limited the use or purchase of guns during the entire period of time Obama was in place, except for a executive order and two things that expanded your rights, and a mandatory background check demand that was an executive order, I guess, and a couple of rule changes by different organizations. He made a suggestion to the ATF that they agreed with. That's tyranny. That's the ATF being the ATF. In 8 years, Obama got through 276 executive orders. Executive actions really aren't the same thing. That's one every 10 days. Trump did one or two a week in 4 years, 220. Eisenhower did one a week. Truman did one twice a week. And FDR did one a day almost. But Obama's the tyrannical bastard for a little less than half of this, actually about half of it, expanded your rights or reduced regulation on you. But hey, he had bad intentions, so that counts, right? If this is your idea of a dictator, you guys are really, really weird. And you have a really low standard for liberals and a very high standard to call Putin a tyrannical bastard. Thanks for watching. Have a good day. Good luck with that.